moving on, the New Zealand Manufacturers and Exporters Association, John Wally. Welcome.
Good afternoon. Now you should all have one page. That's the one.
Yep.
And I'm really only going to talk briefly to that and then be quiet and answer any questions that you've got. So, just in case you hadn't noticed, the tradable sector's under considerable pressure. It's pretty tough out there. Margins are under pressure, costs are rising, selling prices are hard to move, the standard sort of line that I run on many occasions. And sort of price increases around 6% to 3 or 4 times what we can generally get out of the market today. So I think that sort of puts the thing in context. From the membership, we had really no strong reactions to the annual plan this time. It was the middle year of 3 years, and they said, well, it's 6.5%. That was what was predicted. But it's not really a success. We wish we could get the same sort of price rises. And the discussion around debt is really the way that the council determines to manage its balance sheets in the medium term. So I guess the flag today would be to make a difference, not to sink into the detail and saying what you ought to do, because I know you're going through a strategic exercise, but encourage you to think outside the box and maybe do things a bit differently. And don't get into the sort of binary sell assets or don't sell assets. There are good reasons to sell assets, there are bad reasons to sell assets. So just don't get into that sort of yes-no dichotomy. There are things you can do to talk about. Think about the anchor projects. A good few of those could be seen as optional, and they could be scheduled out. But ask the community what it thinks. I mean, I don't think I've ever been asked, and I might have a view, and you might have a different view. But I'm sure if we put our minds to it, we could find out what the general view was and implement that in some sort of reinstatement schedule. That means you're reducing the spending rate, which will reduce the debt, which will then deal with the exposure or the risk we might carry that was mentioned in terms of interest rates rising. But get the infrastructure done quickly. And then the bit of the sort of sectional interest, try and really focus on local preference. You're spending local money, spending it locally is a good idea. Deal with the issues around the district plan in terms of reverse sensitivity and the user place conflicts that I mentioned in the presentation. And I guess the final point I'd make is understand the spending vectors. What brings money into the city and what takes money out of the city, and try to sort of reinforce the stuff that brings the money into the city. So I'll answer any questions you've got now. And that's a minute longer than I intended to speak, so I'm sorry about that.
Well, I'll start off, but I think that's an interesting idea about going out for community feedback on priorities. I know that, there's been public discussion around one of our anchor projects, the town hall, the part of the performing arts precinct, and in some ways, maybe it is time with good information to go out and actually have that as a very public conversation and get some feedback. But I think what you're saying is, while we're out there, talk about the others as well.
Well, I think again, it's not really, you sort of ask the question, here are the anchor projects, given you can only do one at once, which one would you do first? Which one would you do second? Which one would you do third?
It's about setting priorities.
And it's not a hard thing to do a rank correlation and say this is what the community sees in terms of the order. Now, whether that's spread over 5 years, 10 years or 15 years then comes back to the debt situation and how liquid the city is. And this is why I make the comment, I think the future for the next 5 to 10 years is going to be more about balance sheet management, the capital account, than it is the income account.
Right. Yeah. Yanni?
So we have consulted publicly on things like the town hall. We've been out through public process like this. We've had feedback, and we had an overwhelming majority in support
That was before
of retaining it.
That's before the quarter meeting, the report.
Yeah, but I think it's an interesting point, isn't it? Because we get people coming and saying to us, things are so slow, stop relitigating things, just have some certainty, have some clarity. And then we seem to get this kind of thing about, well, we need to go out and talk more over certain things. But the cost share, there's never been any public consultation over it. And I wonder whether you would support us actually consulting with our community over the agreement that we have with government, the single most biggest agreement in the history of our city that's had no public
So you want me to
consultation.
insert myself between local and national government, do you?
No, that's not a fair comment.
I was just thinking, when I wrote this, or when we talked about this, I was thinking about something just very, very simple and straightforward. We've got a capital programme in front of us. And however it's paid, it's got to get paid for, because whoever builds it's going to get paid. So where the money comes from is a separate discussion to asking the community about what are the priorities that you see across these optional. Now, if you're a super, super keen rugby supporter, you might not see a stadium as optional. If you're somewhere else on the spectrum, you might see it differently. But it's really asking on those optional projects, the things that we clearly can live without because we are living without them, what they might see as the priority, because that then informs a spending rate, or potentially informs a spending rate. Where the money comes from is a slightly different, deeper question. And that goes back to my first point about old commitments. You know, off the table, let's talk about this the way it is.
Yep, Tim?
Thank you very much for your presentation. It's common sense, it's just straight to the point and didn't go on for long, so thank you very much for that.
Well,
Unlike me,
regardless of the quality, if it doesn't go on for long, it's always a good point.
Absolutely. If we remove the town hall out of the picture, I totally agree with going back to the public with regards to those anchor projects. Would you agree that if we reviewed those anchor projects to take it one step further, I mean, for instance, the Metro Sports Facility, should it have elite sports bits and add-ons in there, or should it focus on community and ratepayers? I mean, your thoughts on that? And you could take that to the library and also the stadium.
I can't give you an opinion on that. I can give you my opinion for what that's worth, but I don't have an opinion from the association's perspective, so I'm better just not really answering it. Really.
You could be a politician.
Yeah.
Thank you.
In terms of the manufacturers and exporters, I mean, you know, whenever I talk about the impact of the earthquakes on the Canterbury economy, you know, I always say that you could be excused for not noticing that we'd had an earthquake, and it's that it is the manufacturing and the large rural hinterland that we service as a city that means that our economy remains incredibly buoyant despite the massive impact in the centre of the city on the earthquake. So should we be telling a stronger story about the economy and why it is a strong economy?
I think that the strength of the economy is its diversity, and it's also the place where most manufacturers and exporters sit. There are very few high street consumer products that are made in New Zealand for all the reasons of scale, etc., etc. But the relationship tends to be in supply chains. And so we supply other people who make things. And so when the guy who runs the Electrolux plant rings up from Adelaide, rings up Tom Thompson at Elastomer and says, yeah, you've had an earthquake and that's a bit of a problem. Yeah, it's a bit of a... When am I getting my stuff? Because they've got a beast to feed called their production facility. And so if the local people didn't get up and running within a week to 2 weeks, they had no business anyway, irrespective of the earthquake. And so that for the ones who were fortunate enough not to have their factories closed as a result of a problem, or the natural one or the man-made one, the barriers and the cordons that went up, which hit a few people, then they've really got to get up and going quick, and that drives that resilience. It isn't an option. You've got to move very quickly.
I just wonder whether we have captured enough of those resilient stories as, you know, for lessons learned you know, one of the lessons learned that I think we've all taken from that immediate response from central government was that the wage subsidy was like the most powerful measure. Do you want to comment on that?
Oh, it's the universal comment from everybody I talk to. What the wage subsidy did was took the pressure off everybody in the short term, which meant there wasn't the worry about throwing extra resource at things. I mean, I'll mention Tom Thompson again. He had his people out in his supply chain helping them fix up their wheels.
Well, they picked them in the garage, I think.
Well, that was the people in the factory, but it's really the logistics people who didn't have the depth in the management system to actually deal with the extra problems that the event had thrown on them. So Tom had got his people out, helping them sort things out. This bag of plastics looks much like the same as that bag of plastic, but if you mix them together, they're both useless.
Right.
And so that type of skill was actually pushed out into the individual supply chains. But again, take my first point, everybody's under pressure. And what that extra wage subsidy did was let people focus on the problem, not focus about paying for the problem.
Yeah, I think it's a hugely powerful message. And, you know, I've got a sense that we need to be learning the lessons, you know, the good and the bad from our experience. And that's one that I think we really ought to be embedding into future planning for disaster.
Fast, simple and effective.
Yep. That's excellent. Well, look, thank you very much for, time's gone very quickly, but thank you very much for making the effort to come in and a strong submission. And now I'd like to invite